Welcome everybody to our October monthly education with Edge Counseling and Wellness. I am Amber. I am the practice manager and wellness coordinator. And today speaking will be Olivia. She's one of our therapists here at the office. So to start off by introducing the office, the Edge Counseling and Wellness team. So we have several therapists that work for our team. We have been around since 2018. Audrey started the practice, and we have several therapists that work for us, all specializing in different areas within the mental health umbrella. And Olivia is currently doing EMDR, which you will learn about today. So just a couple of things to note. This is not group therapy. This is just simply an educational tool in order to allow individuals to learn more about different types of tools we have in our tool belt within the Edge Counseling and Wellness team. So if you have any further questions or are interested in counseling services, you can certainly reach out to myself, and I'd be happy to see who would be the best fit for you, and make sure that we take care of you and your health and wellness. So without further ado, I will introduce Olivia, and she will be able to talk a little bit about herself first, just to introduce herself, and then take it away talking about EMDR.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amber. I really appreciate the warm welcome. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well and enjoying the fall weather. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you guys so that way we can start our presentation today. So this is EMDR, so welcome. My name's Olivia. As Amber said, I'm here at Edge Counseling and Wellness. I'm part of a big group of therapists. We all have different specialties in the area, but just that way you guys understand a little bit about me and what I do, I create a little about me page, okay? So I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. I came out here on military orders around 2016, I believe, or 2017. I joined the military when I was 17 years old. I've had 8 years in of service. I did my undergrad at University of Illinois at Springfield. I did pre-med and psychology. I found a love for talking. I love talking. I will talk this whole session probably. So I was like, man, and I can get paid to do it and help people. So I ended up going to Bradley University. I got my master's in clinical mental health counseling. I'm currently pursuing my doctorate. I'm trying to get that done, still in the process of starting studies with that. But I have so much previous work with mental health. This is really where I found my niche in life. Originally, I thought I might want to do the medical field. So I did work with like CNA. I did a telemetry specialist where like I monitored people's heart rates. But once I found out I really like to talk and I get paid to do it, I kind of went down that route. So I've done work with inpatient psych through Carle Health. I worked at the Canton Prison Facility for some time. I did some work with the National Youth Advocacy Program here in Peoria, and now I'm in private practice. So that's kind of conducts a little bit about me, but I'm sure why we're all here today is to learn about EMDR. So we're going to get into that. So EMDR, super fancy term. What does it mean? What is it? EMDR is basically acronym for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Huge fancy word. We're going to break it down for you. Originally, it was just known as eye movement desensitization. And what I mean by this is that this type of therapy is trauma therapy, and it specifically focuses on our eye movements. And I'm going to get more into that because I don't want you guys to think that I'm trying to hypnotize you or this is some voodoo magic that's going on. There's a lot of science that shows eye movements. And this all started with Francine Shapiro, okay? She initially discovered this by walking through the park. She was working specifically with sexual assault victims and veterans that were coming out of the war, and they were having all these PTSD symptoms. And Francine Shapiro, she was walking into the park one day and she was thinking about like something that was on her mind. And she noticed when she was done walking that she felt significantly better about like her worries about what she started the walk on. So she stopped and she thought about it, and she was like, man, I wonder what's occurring in my mind right now. Like, why am I feeling better? And she noticed that while she was walking, she would look at like, oh, there's a dog on the path. And then she'd look up in the trees and there'd be a squirrel up there. And she noticed that her eyes would move around consistently. And what's interesting is that within the same couple of years that EMDR was founded, REM cycle in our sleep was also founded. So rapid eye movement is part of our sleep cycle. It's the deepest level of sleep we'll have. It's where our blood pressure is the lowest, our heart rate is the lowest, and basically our eyes move back and forth during that time. So this is kind of like the few couple years in like around the 1990s where eye movement sort of became this new like not like cliche, but this new technology almost that we were finding. EMDR actually originally was just EMD. So the reprocessing portion actually was just kind of forgot about for some time. She worked just on the eye movement part, and she started these control studies to help populations and stuff like that. And they noticed that there was like a 60% clinical significance over the course of 16 sessions. And what this means is that 60% of people who saw people for EMDR, like specialists like that I'm training to be, or other EMDR certified people, they found that after 16 sessions, 60% of them found a reduction in their symptoms of what their trauma initially was. So after all these studies were conducted, it came to be 1990, and EMD became EMDR. We kind of found out that the eye movement's important, but it's also important to reprocess those traumatic memories, right? We shouldn't just keep having them or like have a recurring negative like cognition about them. So not only is it important for us to understand our trauma, but it's also important for us to move past it. And Francine Shapiro ended up adding in that reprocessing component later. It was only a couple years later in the 1990s. And now we're going to do a big time jump. So between 1990 and 2013, it took 23 years for the World Health Organization to recognize EMDR as therapy and stuff, as something that actually is clinically shown over the course of 23 years to help clients. So the World Health Organization only just recently kind of like gave us affirmation that what we're doing actually works. And then unfortunately in 2019, Francine Shapiro passed away. However, her work still lives on. She founded the EMDR Institute that's here in the United States, and that continues work and training programs for therapists. So EMDR, we're going to break this down a bit further. Healing comes from you. It does not come from me. And I think that's the most beautiful part of therapy, because it's so easy for someone to sit and pass judgment on someone like, oh, like, you don't like loud voices, well, go to a quiet environment and stuff. And that's great when your therapist says it to you and whatnot, but it's more, I would say it's more organic when it comes from you and it's your thought process that has the idea in the first place. So EMDR postulates that we are naturally designed for healing. Just like if I get a paper cut the next day, my paper cut is going to heal up and I'm not going to bleed anymore and all this other stuff. And Francine Shapiro argued that our mind does the same thing. We experience like these paper cuts. We experience trauma, whether or not if it's big trauma, like we're witnessing murder, or it's a small trauma, like we just don't like loud voices and that makes us anxious. So no matter what type of trauma it is, our brain is beautiful and our brain is capable of healing. And Shapiro argues that just like a paper cut on my finger, our mind will go through that same exact process. But it's not as simple as putting a Band-Aid on it, right? Unfortunately, I cannot put a Band-Aid on my head and that will fix my issues. So as a therapist, my goal with EMDR is to be your tour guide, okay? There's many analogies that you'll hear about this. My favorite is that I'm like a ferryman in a boat, okay? And you are the passenger. And all I'm doing is that you're telling me which memory you want to go down, and I will follow you there and guide you through that process. And an important note that I made on this slide that I want you guys to realize is that EMDR is very specific. It's almost scripted word for word from start to finish on what we'll talk about. So there is some counselor distance. For me, I consider myself very personal, very bubbly. I like to ask a lot of questions. Like I said, I get paid to talk, so I love to talk. But you might not experience that side of me in EMDR. EMDR lets you take control, lets you be the talker, share what you want to talk, and share the memories that you have experienced regarding trauma. So in that way, I might be more reserved when you come to EMDR training. And that might not be a good fit for everyone. Some people want validation from their therapist. Some people want to talk more in depth and stuff. So if you're not someone who feels like you want to be a passenger in a boat, or you don't want to watch your life on a movie, EMDR might not be the best fit. So like I said, EMDR is planned from start to finish. There are so many stages that go on, and I'm going to break down the stages more in depth for you guys here in a second. But just so that way you get an overlook, there's 8 major stages in EMDR. This goes all the way from the time I meet you all the way until the time like we're done with our EMDR sessions. As I stated in the previous slide, they usually will typically last about 16 sessions. I've been told they can be shorter or they can be longer. It's kind of up to the individual and how much trauma they want to process, because we might have more memories that are traumatic to us. We might not just want to work on one memory. We might have multiple memories that we need to work on. And that will determine the length of how long you get seen. I would say 16 sessions is what they have cited to be the average number of sessions that you would see me for. I kind of made a note here that phases 1, 2, and 3, which we'll go over in our next slide, are kind of just these initial stages. But stages 4 is when desensitization starts. So this is where in 1990, Francine Shapiro said, oh, there's more to counseling than just eye movements. I need to make sure you're okay with your trauma moving forward. That's where these stages were integrated. So stages 4, 5, and 6, and 7, those are all part of that added on aspect that Francine Shapiro decided was important for us moving forward with memories. So let's go more into depth on these stages. So stages 1, 2, and 3, this is the groundwork for EMDR. This is where I make sure it's a safe environment for you. It might include getting to know me a bit more, so that way you're not sitting down with some stranger delving into your entire life. But it also might be making sure you're mentally okay, right? Because when we deal with traumas and stuff, we're not just talking sometimes about like easy small talk conversations. We talk about deep conversations with each other. And I want to make sure that you are mentally in the right space for that. So in order to make sure that you are prepared for EMDR, I might issue you some assessments. The first one being, it's called a DES2. I don't expect you guys to remember it, but basically it's just me scanning for you if you have dissociative disorders. This might be like if you had a trauma and stuff like that, and you don't remember the memory of like it being you remember it from like a bird's eye view. That is what that type of stuff scans for. Now, this doesn't mean that if you do disassociate that you cannot do EMDR treatment, but this does mean that this would flag me on my end on like types of techniques that I might use with you throughout the process to make sure you don't dissociate. Because when we deal with trauma and stuff, we want to be in person. We want to be physically and mentally in the room. I don't want you off somewhere, you know, letting your brain wander and whatnot. Like I said, I am a ferryman, but I'm also a ferryman to make sure we're not going to where the alligators are either, okay? So there's also an ACE score is the next thing that I might issue you. ACE score is basically just your adverse childhood experiences, and that's a fancy word too, so I don't expect you to remember it. But ACE scores basically tell me how much childhood trauma have you experienced. As adults, we notice sometimes that you know, our experiences are just like a rock in a pond with a rippling effect. You guys might remember when you were a kid, that you put your hand on a hot stove once, right? The coil was red. You didn't know what it meant. You saw mom was cooking. You put your hand on the stove and you instantly took that hand back. And you're like, whoa, that hurt. I'm not doing that ever again, right? And from this point forward, you know that when that coil is red, you don't touch it. And we might be that same way mentally with our traumas, where something traumatizing happened to us. I always like to give the example of loud voices to clients. Like you might not realize like when you were younger, maybe you heard mom and dad arguing or talking really loud. And that might be like the hot coil to you, where you learned like loud voices means trouble. It means that I can't be around that. And we carry that onto adulthood. Just like when I see a coil is red at home now, I know not to touch it. You might see when people are yelling or arguing that you just shut away because you know from childhood experience that rock in the pond with the rippling effect, that that's not something that's appropriate or something I should be scared about, something that I need to protect myself from. So that assessment will help me in some ways see how much childhood trauma you have experienced. And then we'll also create a safe space together. The importance of the safe space is interesting because in EMDR, I'll have you go to your happy place, wherever that is. It might be in a park, it might be in a memory that you have, like with a family member or by yourself. But I'll have you go to this safe space sometimes. But I will sometimes shake the boat, okay? I will sometimes be like, okay, you're in your safe space right now, you're in a meadow, but you notice a storm cloud like off in the distance. And I will do that also to test you for what we're going to go over in our next slide, which is our window of tolerance. How much chaos can we tolerate at a given time emotionally before we start to dissociate, before we start going into those assessments I gave you earlier. I'm going to go over that in next slide, but basically what this is going to do is help me work on finding target memories. So what's the window of tolerance? What is this big fancy term? Window of tolerance is very interesting, okay? Because consider this our emotional window. You'll see the center on this picture is green, okay? This is where I want you to be emotionally when you're dealing with trauma. But sometimes we know emotionally, sometimes we're not always who we want to be or how we want to act and stuff. This might be called hyperarousal or hypoarousal. And hyperarousal means that when I'm going to go back to this analogy of parents with loud voices and stuff. This might be when I hear a loud voice, I instantly get scared. My safety alarms are going off in my head, and I am in no place now to process or be present in the moment. And you might notice that you have this sometimes at home. This is an extreme like anxiety. This is where anxiety comes from. This is where fight or flight comes in. This is where racing thoughts come in. Like, oh my goodness, people are yelling in the room. This must mean I'm in trouble, which also then means I'm in danger, which must mean I must go to a safe zone, or I have to mentally like find some place to go. So I don't want you to do that. As someone who's guiding you in this process of getting through your trauma, I don't want you in hyperarousal state, because we all know, like, and we probably all have experienced at some point where we are going, woo, we are fire alarms, we're going everywhere mentally. You're not able to be in the moment. So I don't want that. So that's when that safe space might come into play. I might be like, okay, we are getting too emotionally taxed. I might see you crying in the room. Now this isn't me saying that you can't cry in EMDR, but this is me saying, like, I might notice you shaking or starting to get really worked up in the memory that we're in. I will initiate your safe space to try to bring you back into that optimal arousal zone, that green area that's in the chart. And now you might also experience the opposite effect when you're dealing with this memory. You might experience hypoarousal, which is the red area at the bottom of the screen here. Now, this is where you start to become numb. This is people who say it is what it is sort of situation. Sometimes we notice that people say that, but they're actually hurt on the inside. This is where you separate yourself from the issue. And this is where we get into dissociative disorder. This is, again, another area where I don't want you to be in. I want you to be able to feel your emotions so that way you can process what you're feeling. So if I notice that you are having numbness, that you're feeling depressed, that you're shutting down on me, like you're not wanting to talk anymore, you're just staring off into space, I will also bring in that safe zone to try to bring you back up. Now, it's important with EMDR because I am not in your mind, right? I don't know what you're thinking, unfortunately. I'm not a mind reader. So it's also important for you yourself to also be able to understand and know, oh my goodness, I'm starting to get super anxious. I feel my legs shaking, or I'm not able to respond to Olivia or whatever counselor I'm seeing. I'm not able to respond to them anymore. Those are signs for you yourself that that we need to pull out a bit. And this is really hard with EMDR, right? Because everyone comes in when they see me and they want to address that trauma right off the bat and get through it. There's a reason it takes 16 sessions on average to get through one trauma. It's because of this window of tolerance. I do not want you going too far one way or another. So after you've passed all the green flags here, we're going to go to our next stages, okay? And these are the reprocessing stages. This is where the fun work begins. As soon as you're able to stay in that green zone for me and talk about your trauma, this is where eye movements start. And eye movements are amazing, and I'm going to go more in depth on how important they are. But this is where I'm going to bring out my little voodoo wand, and I'm going to have you follow my finger back and forth. So eye movements are interesting because they work on our memory. I'm going to discuss that a bit later in the different types of memory, but just know that right now EMDR affects our memory and how we process things. And when I have you do eye movements, I will only have you work on at any time, only one memory at a time. So I will have you trace back to your childhood. You'll see in this diagram here that I have depicted the 4 red squares. It'll say past memory 1, past memory 2, past memory 3, past memory 4. This is your life. These little boxes right here are your life with trauma, okay? So the most recent memory will be the one that we start off with. You might come into counseling with me and you might say, Olivia, I'm really struggling. My boyfriend and I got into a heated argument today. He raised his voice and I just shut down on him. I just went to the bathroom. I closed the door. I had to have some me time. I couldn't handle it. And in EMDR, I will have you work back. It's called a float back technique is what we call it. But basically what happens here is I have you start off with this key memory and I have you say, that's really interesting. Tell me about a previous time when that happened. And you might remember a time in high school where you were at a football game and everyone was super loud and obnoxious around you and you couldn't handle the loud voices, so you ended up going home early. And I will respond, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that. Let's float back even further. And that through that progression, we might get to that core childhood memory, that memory that you experienced with your parents yelling in the room and you felt like you were in danger. And I will have you connect these memories. So the reprocessing stages works on that core memory first, the parents yelling at you. I will have you do eye movements with me. We will talk about that trauma. And then and the hope is that once we identify, address, and heal the process of that core memory, the parents yelling in the room, that the other memories won't seem so significant to you anymore. So you'll be able to look back at that high school football game and realize like, wow, my emotions were connected because of what I experienced as a child. Now I understand where my emotions are coming from. I'm able to label it, and now I can move past it. So that's where the reprocessing comes into play. And I don't want you guys to think that you have to do eye movements. I've had clients in the past too that have just tapped on their shoulders. So if you're like me and your eyes are a little special and you're not able to do certain movements or you get dizzy, there are other means for us to do this, but it is proven clinically that the eye movements work the best. So, and after we get through all of that, this is the closure stage. This is where I evaluate. We do maybe a talk therapy session, like, hey, like, how do you feel about that? What's going on? And there might be more trauma to go on. There might be other memories. Maybe it's no longer that people are yelling at you. You might have other trauma, like with social anxiety, where you're called on in class when you were a kid and stuff, and you didn't know the answer, so you felt dumb. So that might be another small trauma that we work on in therapy. And this process will continue and continue until you come into that session, you're like, Olivia, I don't think I have anything more to talk about today. So going on, this is where eye movements come in, because I want to make sure that you understand what eye movements target, why they're important, and why we do them. So when it comes to trauma, we know that our memories aren't processed correctly, okay? Our memories sometimes are stored without the information that we need, which results in distortions. And what I mean by this is going back to my analogy of your parents yelling when you were a child. When you look back on that memory from a traumatic perspective, you see yourself as being in danger, like something happened to me. And what I want the perspective to change to, and this isn't like me trying to put a new facade on the story or put a lie in for you to believe or false hope. This is me wanting you to understand that you are a separate component of that, and that you witnessed something traumatic happen to you, and that's why it affected you. But I want you guys to kind of change your perspective on what happened, because we'll notice when you have traumatic memories, we generally have this negative belief about ourselves moving forward. So like the analogy of me telling you, like, you were a child in class, the teacher called on you, you didn't know the answer. So that must mean I'm dumb, right? I'm stupid. And EMDR targets that. Like, that's not what you should believe about yourself. We all are human and we are infallible or not infallible. Like, we make mistakes, right? We're not perfect. So these are kind of the normal these are the distortions that EMDR says most people will experience. And these are ones that I commonly hear from traumatic memories. So the first one is that there is a distortion of defectiveness or action, where I am the cause of the problem, or I'm a bad person. As a kid, maybe your parents were going through a divorce and you felt like, wow, maybe I caused the divorce, I'm the problem. And that's what led to your trauma with that memory. You might have the distortion of safety or vulnerability, where you don't feel safe or I can't trust anyone. Again, I'm going to go back to that analogy where you were a kid and stuff and your parents were yelling at you and you just didn't know where to go. You didn't know how to feel safe again after that point, especially at home or maybe in the kitchen if that's where the fight happened. And that overall arching negative feeling about yourself where I can't be safe anywhere now. There might be a distortion of control where you feel like I'm powerless, I'm not in control, I can't trust myself. This might be when you were a kid experiencing that same memory. You might feel like I couldn't control the situation. And now you have this innate desire throughout the rest of your life where you have to make sure that you are always in control of whatever happens, because you don't want to be out of control again, because you witness what happens when you're not. And the last one is this distortion of connected and belonging. This is, I don't belong, I can't connect, I'm different, and that's not okay. So this might be in this situation with your parents where I don't belong part of this family, or I don't understand mom and dad, so I can't connect to them and their emotions. So all of these are processes that I talk about in EMDR, and anyone will who's EMDR certified with you, about what's that core belief about ourselves that we think is so negative about ourselves, and how can we switch it to something better where I am safe, I am not a problem, I am in control, and I do belong. So that's all great, right? How memories are processed wrong. But then how does our memory work? Okay. We have multiple forms of memory, okay? Which I love, but memory is also finicky in some ways. We have something called working memory, okay? Working memory is how we store memory for certain periods of time, okay? And this is the example I use whenever I tell people about it. It's like you're going shopping and you have your little shopping cart in front of you, and you know you have $100 budget, so you put a $5 cans of beans in the cart, and you know, okay, I owe the grocery store $5, I have $95 left in my budget. That is working memory. And then we have episodic memory. And now this is how we recall past events, even how we felt emotionally in the past. So this might be that you left the grocery store with your $5 can of beans. You're like, shoot, where did I leave my car, right? We can't remember. We can't recall past events, or we do recall past events and remember how stressed we are. Like, I remember 2 years ago when I had the same experience in the parking lot, my car got stolen. So we will innately have this type of memory. The third type of memory is somatic memory. How do we remember the meanings of words, facts, faces, familiar objects? Now I'm going to go back to the grocery store analogy here. This is that I know I live in America, I know because of my culture, I know that cars can be found in parking lots and my car's missing. So I know I need to look in this parking lot. Oftentimes our somatic memory is not tied to our personal experience at all. This is like culturally based. This is what you learn growing up, that red means stop at stop signs. And then the last type of memory we have is prospective memory. Now, this memory is interesting. This is how we remember things that will happen in the future. And you're like, Olivia, we just talked about this. You can't mind read and you don't know what I'm going to say next. That's true. But we do have memory like, oh, I found my car, but I have an oil change that's due on Friday. So I had to remember to take my car there. So it's how we remember things in the future. And all of our memory here is stored in what's called a hippocampus part of our brain. It's all responsible for all the short-term memory, all the long-term memory, all this working memory. It all goes into here and remembers it. And this is sometimes where trauma gets, tangled up. So why are you talking about memory when we're talking about trauma? Because this is what I work on with eye movements. Eye movement is associated with a reduction in your ability to see, obviously, and your emotional association. So if I have you sit here right now and I tell you to dart your eyes back and forth across the room, you'll probably notice that your vision gets a little blurry, right? And you're struggling to think. And this is exactly what I want when we're talking about trauma, because I want to target your working memory. And just a little recap, the working memory is when you have that shopping cart and you know that, oh, I have $100 budget. I'm going to put this $5 cans of bean in the cart. Okay. And sometimes I don't want that in trauma, because I don't want you guys to get so anxious or so disassociative that you aren't able to be in the moment with your memory. So safe space is great, right? But sometimes you need a little bit more than that, which is where eye movement comes into play, because I'm going to target to overload your working memory. So this will be, I give you the shopping cart, your $100 budget, but I'm running down the aisle and I'm putting every single can of beans into the cart at once. And you can't keep tabs, right? You're not a calculator. You can't do that math that quick. And that's exactly what eye movement does to you mentally. It makes you overload a little bit, so that way you can remove yourself from the trauma and talk to me about what you were experiencing in the moment from a safe distance. Now, working memory is limited to what it can do. Like I said, you can only put so many cans of beans in the cart, but you don't need to do the eye movements for EMDR to work. I can also overstimulate working memory by your senses, by overstimulating your sense of feel and stuff. So that's why I tell people, if you can't do the eye movements, we'll resort to tapping probably. Now, like I said, studies have shown that it's more effective to do eye movements, but studies have also shown significance with just the regular tapping, just not as effective as eye movements. So I can do either or, but so that way you guys understand that eye movements is not some crazy follow the pen, I'm going to hypnotize you. This is me playing with your memory, so that way you can be from a safe distance when you talk about it to me. Now, I always tell people, it's when they first come into my office, sometimes talking to me, you have to go clothes shopping, right? EMDR might not be the right fit for you. EMDR, despite contrary belief, is not the only trauma therapy that there is, okay? There is CBT. This is cognitive behavioral therapy. If you're someone who's like looking at this PowerPoint with me and you're like, Olivia, that just doesn't sound like something I want to partake in, CBT is really good. This challenges your thought process. Why do you believe that you weren't safe in this memory? And you will do a lot of talk therapy with that. There's also psychodynamic therapy. This focuses on exploring the impact of earlier memories with the goal of entering our unconscious mind. So this is an interesting concept because psychodynamic theory postulates that we have a conscious mind and an unconscious mind, like a mind that kind of like talks in the background. So you might be interested in seeing like maybe what else is dug back there besides just not feeling safe. Like, is there more to it? And in that case, psychodynamic therapy might be for you. There's IFS therapy, which if you guys watched our little broadcast last month, Ashley did an amazing job talking about IFS therapy. And this is great also for trauma. This is how do we understand our role? Who am I as a mother? And why does me being a mother so traumatic to me when I witnessed what my mother did as a child? That type of role. And then lastly, there's experimental. This is kind of bridge meaning. This is more of like music, art, dance. This is like your artistic therapy. This might be like, I might use this with kids sometimes, you know, like kids don't want to talk about their trauma that they just experienced a couple of weeks ago. So I might have them draw me a picture or take a step back. And us as adults might need to do the same thing, right? Maybe we're not ready to talk to someone else about it, but we do have images in our mind or how we want to represent what that means to us. And that's that type of therapy. And then the last thing I want to talk about is I call it the baby EMDR. This is art therapy. So this is kind of like EMDR's cousin. This is accelerant resolution therapy. And I kind of recommend this if you want to try EMDR, but you don't want to do the whole 16 sessions. Maybe insurance won't pay for it. You don't have that much time to dedicate. You have kids at home. Art therapy also uses eye movement, okay? The only thing that it varies with is a couple things. And the first one is that it's a faster version of EMDR. And that means that I won't focus so much on the cognitive processing. So I won't focus so much on why do you not feel safe? Why do you not feel like you're good enough? But I will focus more on the image that comes to your mind when you think about that memory. Because whenever we have trauma, we almost have like a camera in our mind, right? We'll filter through like different images in our head or what we picture is happening. So art will focus just on the image itself. And it will focus more on hunting the good in the image as opposed to EMDR, which will help you find more resolution in the meaning behind it. And what I mean by this is that art might have you take a snapshot, and in this snapshot, you might imagine mom and dad arguing with each other with you in the seat. And I might have you postulate and stuff about like, now you like, maybe like a good in this would be like, you learned like, this is not who you want to be as a parent and stuff, and finding confidence and comfort in that concept. Art will only work on a single memory at a time, just like EMDR does. But EMDR will bring up other memories. So remember how I talked about earlier about parents arguing the high school football game and whatnot? I will have you daisy chain those memories. Art will not do that. Art will tell you what's your trauma, what picture do you create, and how do we change that image? So it's kind of like a speedy version of EMDR. But I always like to let people know about this option, just in case you're like, I don't have time for 16 sessions, but I want to get a little bit of a grasp or a little bit of a taste of what EMDR can do for me. And I think that concludes my presentation. So that's all that I had. But if you guys have any questions, I'm more than open to them.
Okay, I'll ask one question. Thank you, Olivia. I learned a lot. Um, do you recommend any videos to watch just for like mock examples of how EMDR actually looks?
Yeah, so EMDR actually has an official webpage. It's the EMDR Institute, EMDRIA.com. There's a bunch of videos right there on their homepage that you can look at. I'll overview some of the information I told you about, and it'll also be little tidbits that you can watch too about like how does this look in session or how would this play out for me.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically regarding that question, Olivia, any information that you want to provide, I can, when we upload this to YouTube, I can certainly include that in the notes.
Okay.
And anyone that is viewing today, I will send the YouTube video out, the recording once we have that live. A couple of questions that I think would be helpful. Say someone either is currently in therapy or maybe is not. What would be some things or some reasons that they might consider this form of therapy?
I noticed that sometimes like clients and stuff like that, they won't realize that they have trauma until they talk about it, you know? This is very common, I will say, with domestic violence, especially. People will come in for couples counseling. They'll talk to me and they'll be like, oh, I didn't realize that my boyfriend or significant other knowing my location all the time can be a sign of domestic abuse and stuff. So sometimes people don't realize that they have experienced this trauma because they're like, well, I didn't witness anyone get killed or anything, so I must not be traumatized by it. So sometimes talk therapy will bring out the realization that something happened to them. So I always tell people sometimes you'll start off with talk counseling and stuff, and they'll be like, wow, I am traumatized by this. Maybe we should work on that. And then that's when EMDR can be recommended.
Great. And then the other thing is that I know in our office we have a couple of tools that we use specifically for EMDR. You had also mentioned tapping. Do you want to talk about some of the tools that they might see if they were to partake in a session?
Yeah, there's plenty of things that you can use. EMDR can also be done virtually, so don't feel like you have to like be in person to do these sessions. We have tons of things that we have in the office. There's something called a light bar, which is this big bar that you'll stick right in front of you and has a little circle, and it'll just dart back and forth to follow your eyes and whatnot. You might see me using my fingers, although I will let you know my hand does get very tired, so that's where the light bar comes into play. But if you're doing EMDR from home, I tell people something as simple as 2 Post-it notes, putting up on the wall, something for you to put your eyes between. You can really use anything for EMDR tools, which I think is awesome.
That's fantastic. Would you say, so there's a couple of different things out there because EMDR is bilateral stimulation, right? So there's a couple of different tools out there that have become more popular, like bilateral music, for example. So are there things that you teach your clients that they can utilize then on their own in order to work through some things on their own if they aren't like big T traumas or something like that? I don't know if you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, I actually don't recommend that people work on this at home. My analogy of being a ferryman in a boat and stuff, I'm there for your safety, okay? I do not want you going home and practicing this and then disassociating or becoming super anxious and not having someone there to talk to about what's going on or someone there to guide you back to that middle green line that we talked about. So I actually do not recommend for clients to go home after this and put 2 Post-it notes on the wall and be like, okay, I'm going to think about my trauma and do this at home. There is so many other issues that would arise from that about safety.
Perfect. So then when it does come to some of those options that have become popular, do you recommend those at all for any reasons?
Yeah, I tell people EMDR is very difficult. It's very difficult to sit down with someone and review every single aspect of your life where you felt you were worthless or not good enough and stuff. EMDR will kind of put you in the frying pan in that manner. So if you feel like that's not something that's comfortable for you, that's where I recommend these other sessions that you can do. Like I said, if it's time, you can do the art therapy and whatnot. There's psychoanalysis, CBT. Like I said, Ashley also does that internal family systems. So there's all these other concepts to address trauma without being thrown in the frying pan that EMDR would do to you.
Love it. Any other questions? Olivia, any other thing that you wanted to add before we close today?
No, I don't think I have anything.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for October's education session. I will have this posted on YouTube within a couple of days, and everyone that was live, I will send that video out to. So thank you again, and we will post our November session here shortly with information on what they will be on. So thanks so much.
Thank you.